Contextual variables in systemic supervision, enhancing the supervisor's ability to assess for the role of culture, gender, ethnicity, and economics in the supervision process. In this presentation, I will discuss different variables in context. I will discuss what culture means, and then putting all of that together so that the supervisor is able to supervise effectively with trainees and therapists. So the first slide is understanding context. Context influences a person's actions, thoughts, emotions, and interactions. Context also influences the way a person perceives those thoughts, emotions, and actions. It can include explicit and implicit purposes for which that interaction takes place. And it's important in understanding the patterns of behaviors and patterns of identity in the supervisor, the supervisee, or the trainee, and how the supervisor sees himself through his own self-journey. Contextual considerations in supervision. And so as you can see, there's a pie chart. And so there are multiple different contextual considerations, things that supervisors have to think about when it comes to supervising. So again, the developing selves of the trainees, that also includes the supervisor, because at one point that supervisor was a trainee. It's important in looking at the setting where the trainee is going to be working, looking at the program that the trainee is in, the postgraduate training, the agencies and the private practice, if there is private practice that the trainee is going into or is working through, the social location. And that one is important because of the different economics, the different cultures that might be in different locations. And then lastly is the intersectionality. So there are different contexts in culture. And this is not all of them, but this is just a few of the things to consider when thinking about different culture. Race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, age, generation, patterns of interaction, different worldviews. I don't have on here, a few other different things. And so, again, this was just a list, but here's a different chart of how the different culture concepts and contexts come into play. First, there is the individual, then there are the people surrounding the individual, and then these different other systems, the mesosystem, the exosystem, the macrosystem, and these are all important because these are really what create the culture in the individual, the culture in the family, the culture in the system, and it really pulls together the idea of the systemic unit and therapy, the models and family systems that we follow. So it's important in building the cultural competence to understand the different contexts and understand culture. You have to be competent in this. And again, it doesn't just mean the ethnicity. There's more to that than just culture. And so you have to think about it in terms of two different things here. And so to be culturally competent is to expect and understand the complexities of culture. So you know that there are going to be different things, and you learn to understand the uniqueness and individuality of every person and every unit. And number two, to keep the complexities of culture at the forefront during clinical work and supervision. It is okay to constantly have that in your mind, to explore that, because if you're thinking about your own culture and not really focused on the client's culture, you could get things mixed up, and clients and families may not come back because they don't feel like they can relate. They don't feel like there's a relationship, and and ultimately the family will continue to struggle. So it is very important to keep that understanding of that client, that family, that unit, where they come from, and how to be able to work with them. Also, cultural humility goes along with being competent in the culture. And this, when working in a supervisory, system or clinical system, it is important to attempt to see the person at the center of that system. So if you are working with a trainee who is not, you're a male and she's a female, understanding the differences in that. And again, from last slide, bringing that to the forefront, being aware that there's a difference there and using that difference. To be curious about a client or trainee situation, to know their life, and to explore that. And that really does build the self of the therapist, which is, to being self-reflective about one's ideas and perceptions, to be aware of those experiences that you've had yourself as a supervisor, those limitations, perspectives, your own biases, and your own prejudices, to be aware of those and being mindful in the moment of when those might occur, and knowing those triggers that bring those forward, and to be aware of the position of power that the supervisor has with the trainee rather than the power over. And if you're working with the trainee is working with you, then the trainee can learn to work with the clients and the families and not consider themselves to have power over the families and clients and people that we work with. Are there because there's a lot of sense of loss of control or who they are or identity, and that's important that we work with them rather than trying to work over them or around them. So when approaching the idea of culture, it's important to understand that there are 4 different sections of culture as we learn about them, such as in like the growth of change. There is a process to that. There's a process of approaching the idea of culture. And so number 1 is the universalist, that individuals and families are more alike than different. The particularist is the opposite of that all individuals and families are more different than alike. The ethnic focused, that there is an acknowledgement of different thoughts, feelings, and behaviors among ethnic groups. And multidimensional ecological comparative, which is understanding the differences and similarities of values, social stresses, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, ethnic groups. It's just understanding that there are differences and there are similarities through the generic cultural framework of everything. I think the most important thing here is to understand that you can have one or all of these when approaching culture. You might start at the bottom and see something, we are alike. Everybody has to breathe to survive, but that we are all different as well, and being aware of that and using that in supervision and using that in therapy is very important. So how you use culture in supervision is through 3 different ways. So you can move beyond the cultural stereotypes, and the supervisor assists the trainee in doing these. It's about that we're multicultural, not one-dimensional. Everybody is not the same. And so being able to help the trainee to understand that, and you yourself as a supervisor being able to understand that everyone is different. Then maintaining the both and stance to honor that there are subcultural differences as well as individual differences. So it's not that person is one way, that person is like this. So there are multiple different aspects to a person and to their culture. And third is helping the trainee to embrace the knowing and not knowing stance, being able to show confidence and curiosity, getting to know the families and the clients that you're working with. I had one family where that was so important, to be able to say, I want to learn about what you guys know and where you come from and who you are, and to be able to embrace the understanding of where they come from and their personal meanings. We practice supervision for multiple different reasons. And so I have this cultural iceberg because it's very important to see the way culture is. And so like trauma there's so much stuff underneath and very little stuff at the top that you can see. The cultural iceberg is kind of like that as well. There are all of these covert aspects of a person that we don't see, and if we don't ask about, then we won't know, because they only show certain parts of that person and that culture. And so it's important to make ourselves conscious of the involvement in our settings that we work culturally, to be able to really assist effectively with different families, that we have a direct dialogue about the settings, policies, procedures, and the various roles and expectations with our trainee as the supervisor, so that we understand what setting that they're working, the policies, procedures that they have, and that we're, again, working with them and not working over them or around them. And that we have clear and open dialogue about diversity and cultural context. Again, it is so important to just be open about that. If we pretend that the culture's, not in the room, then it's like pretending that the big elephant that's there isn't there either. And sometimes the idea of culture and diversity and understanding those different things can be the elephant in the room. And so it is important to have that clear and open dialogue. More about supervisory practices. I really liked this little picture that I had seen online the other day, and so I attached that because it just goes with everything we were saying. We are all one but different but the same. And so really understanding culture in multiple aspects. Again, it's multifaceted. So these are different techniques that as a supervisor you can use with your trainee, examining intergenerations with the cultural genograms, and having the dialogue about that. And then the trainee can possibly use that with the families as well. Creating cultural circles to identify and dismantle norms, oppressive norms of family life across culture, because people are kind of pushed down where other people are put forward, and so that makes it, again, important to work with and not to have power over. Trainees can keep a daily journal and explore these entries during supervision sessions. And supervisees and trainees can develop cultural competence through role plays and practicing. With my clients and families, role plays is such an effective tool and something that I use very often. So here are some reflections in regards to supervision, what is important to be aware of as a supervisor, as the trainee. Race still matters, even if we say that it doesn't. There are initial negative emotional reactions, so talk about them in supervision. Multicultural supervision is unplanned, rather, and it should be planned because everyone is different and unique. Support and validate, especially by the supervisor, as important to reflect and explore those negative and emotional reactions. Also in the positive aspect, it is so important to support and validate as a supervisor, as a trainee, as a therapist. That is how you show you relate to somebody, and it's how you show that you're listening. And sometimes all people need is to be heard. They just want to be listened to. And lastly, there needs to be a space, a safe space at the supervisory level to communicate and process those experiences. Here are the references. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation and that you learned something in regards to cultural context and supervision. Thank you.